Over the next 3 days, you'll be doing business with some of the best and most promising names in licensing, as well as experiencing new emerging trends from the entertainment, digital, fashion, corporate, art, and brand space, and more. This is also an opportunity to reconnect with your international colleagues as our industry gathers together to celebrate how far we've come in the last year.
Morning, everybody. I'm Charles Riato, president of Lima, and we can actually put a number on how far we've come. This morning, Lima announced the results of our global licensing industry study, and I'm pleased to let you know that retail sales of licensed goods in 2015 totaled $251.7 billion, which is a 4.2% increase over the previous year, while royalty revenue grew to $13.9 billion. That's excellent news for all of us, and this week at Expo, we'll get a great idea of what's coming the rest of 2016 and beyond. As the official sponsor of Licensing Expo, Lima is proud to once again partner with UBM for licensing's largest and most exciting global event, as well as produce Licensing University. This year's program features 21 seminars exploring a broad range of topics from specialty retail to app development, along with 17 roundtable discussions. And it all kicks off now with our keynote session, Toys to Content. Where do we go from here?
Our keynote features leading executives from 3 top toy companies who will examine the increasing role content creation now plays within the toy industry and its implications for the toy, entertainment, and licensing business. Here to introduce our speakers is session moderator Marty Brockstein from Lima. We hope you will find today's keynote the perfect introduction to 3 days of education, networking, and good business.
So thank you all for coming, and now I'll kick it over to Marty Brockstein to introduce our keynote panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oops. I think I'm Bill.
Is this right?
I'm there. That's me.
I'll come here.
It's very complicated.
It's a very complex dance. Good morning, everybody. As Charles and Jessica said, this is the start of a great week. Actually, with Licensing University, we started yesterday morning with our basics day, and there was a digital summit. So this is really, this is the official kickoff now that the show floor is about to open. We have a very, very august panel here to talk about toys and content and where it's all going. To my far right, your far left, we have Susie Lecker, who's Executive VP and Chief Brand Officer for Toy Box at Mattel. Next to Susie, we have Simon Waters, General Manager and Senior Vice President of Entertainment and Consumer Products for Hasbro. And closest to me, Laura Zabersky, Executive VP and Chief Commercial Officer for Jazzwares. And each of you has a rooting section. That's really nice. So we wanted to start off the discussion and ask the panelists to talk about the role of storytelling in building and marketing entertainment brands and how that's evolved over the past few years. How has that changed the toy industry? Where is it all headed? Susie, why don't you start off?
Sure, yeah. So, you know, I think storytelling has always been at the root of toys. I mean, if I think back to, well, I wasn't around, but to the inception of Mattel and Ruth and Elliot Handler with Walt Disney himself, and bringing toys to life through those stories, it's always been there, but certainly there's a lot more content available now than there was back then to bring to life. And from a toy industry perspective, I think the toy companies are changing in terms of structure and talent to really be able to mine this incredibly rich field. So, for instance, at Mattel, we've reorganized to have the Toy Box division, which is the division that I lead, that really works with all of our license partners, big and small, to bring to life all of the great content and dimensionalize the experience for the consumer. So we put the consumer in the middle and not the product in the middle as we relate the whole toy story. So I think that's a big change, is that companies are changing their structure and how they're looking for talent to be able to bring the content to life.
I mean, it's almost archaic to talk about toy companies. You know, the term itself is almost passé. I don't know.
Yeah, it was interesting, Marty. From the introduction this morning, that the word toy, we don't really refer to ourselves at Hasbro as a toy company per se, but a sort of a house of brands, a house of franchise. And I think to Susie's point, that's changing dramatically because the product isn't necessarily what leads the conversation with the consumer anymore.
Right.
There are so many different ways that we can increase our share of life with our consumers through so many different mediums, toy being one of them. I think that's the significant evolution that we've seen.
And we've seen storytelling change dramatically from a time when we all focused on long-form content, 30-minute episodes, 12-minute episodes, to all of a sudden shorter time, shorter stories, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, even 1 minute. And the stories aren't exactly stories. And it's been really interesting to see because kids and adults are still watching it.
How has that changed the introduction of toys in terms of given the amount of content that's out there and the number of platforms available to kids? You know, you don't know when somebody is watching something, where somebody is watching something, how somebody is watching something. The cost of entry onto a platform has gotten extraordinarily cheap. It used to be if you couldn't get on Saturday morning TV, you didn't have anything. We're now at a point where you can create your own YouTube channel, you can get onto a website, create your own website. Given the amount of content that's out there and the number of platforms out there, how do you make the leap to engagement and capturing the child's attention and getting inside their emotions?
I think it would be myopic just to think of the impact on toy. And I think the future state, in many ways, of the industry, and certainly for the total consumer products mix, is you have to think about every single category and every expression when you launch something. Because toy may be a route in, content may be a route in, publishing may be a route in, dress up may be a route in. I mean, there are so many different ways now that kids can access the experience. But at the end of the day, I still think creating engagement through stories is going to be absolutely key.
And I think that for us, when we look at engagement, the interesting thing is you can see where kids are. You can see where adults are. You're looking at YouTube views. You're able to see it. It's different. It's not one form. And we like platforms when you have multiple platforms. If you're a video game and an app and a TV show and you've got YouTube content and YouTube influencer content, that's the full story. But there is data out there and you can see it. And it's just not what we've all traditionally looked at, which was ratings.
Right. Yeah, the fragmentation of media, right? Everybody's consuming things in such different ways, and so you need to be at every stop along the way to make sure that's the transmedia, that's the buzzword, experience, right? So that you have the engagement. Again, it's about the consumer in the center. We used to always put the product in the center and think about how we could best promote product, and now we think about, okay, where are we going to best reach this consumer? And how are we going to imagine how to tell this in an inventive and unique way so that we break through the clutter?
Has toys become one of those platforms, the physical toys themselves? Can that be considered a platform? I mean, you watch a 3-year-old play with whatever, I'll pick Thomas out of the air. And you stand in another room and you watch a 3-year-old play, and the 3-year-old is talking to the trains. There's a whole monologue going on. It might be he or she is repeating a story that they've heard or that they've seen, or that they've read. It might be that they're creating their own stories. So have the toys themselves become a platform, a communications platform of sorts?
I think they always were. I mean, that's the beauty of this industry. It's why I love working in this industry, because you have the opportunity to dimensionalize in 3D an experience for a child or an adult, frankly. I mean, every time we pitch for the first time against a new property and we bring that first model that the creator is seeing of what, they've been creating all of this time, they are like children when they see them. They just get that joy and excitement because you're dimensionalizing, you're able to hold in your hand something you only had in your imagination. So I think that's really compelling, and it's always been, and it's a reason why toys are here to stay, I think, because certainly there are other things you can do with your time, but play is always going to be essential because it dimensionalizes in a way that nothing else can.
I think Susie's right. I mean, I would say that play patterns are very much innate. As a dad of 3 young kids myself, boys and girls, watching how they play has been fascinating, and it's the same as probably I played. The difference being that I think the whole concept of a phygital experience, which is physical and digital, is the biggest shift in our business. Not just for toy, but how kids interact with all forms of expressions. From augmented reality, we're doing that in books ourselves, but just to how they actually interact with the product. And I think getting that fine balance is the key.
How much do you learn from watching your kids play? I should say, by the way, the 3-year-old that I was referring to was not some little 3-year-old, is my grandson. So
I think you have to sort of take a bit of caution of the old focus group of one. We all have instincts and gut instincts on what we believe, but I think the majority of us here are very insights driven, and insights can lead you down to quite different paths that may not be similar to your own experience, but I think it helps. It certainly gives you a perspective and a point of view. I think it certainly gives you a perspective on the ubiquity of screens and screen use, and just how much content is permeating into the home through so many different sources. But I'd say that probably the biggest thing that I've personally experienced is engagement is still key. So reach and frequency, we can all buy reach and frequency, we can all create media campaigns, but actually getting that child to engage in the story in a way that has meaning is the real sort of $1,000,000 question, so to speak.
I was going to say, so how do you do that?
Well, I can't tell you that.
But I'd say the insights of children around you, your own kids, your nieces, nephews,
Your inner kid.
what's happening in the playground. We're always looking what's going on with our employees' children, because they do know. They're on the cutting edge. They often know. I mean, I'd say some of the best brands Jazzwares has signed as licenses have become from a child that somebody knows in the office, their children. At least it opens up the conversation for investigation to say, does it make sense for us? Does it fit? Does it, why are they engaged in that in a different way? And kids are engaged, I think, in a totally different way than they have been, because there are so many ways for them to interact with that brand or property.
Does focus group become less or more part of the process now than it was, say, 5 years ago or something like that, because of the changing media environment? Is the process of creating creating and testing and introducing a toy different because of the media environment, because of just we're 5 years towards something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always evolving, the process of how you get the insight that's going to lead you to that, the great breakthrough. I think focus groups are still an integral part. We kind of run a daycare facility at our Fisher-Price campus so that we have the opportunity to observe all the time. So we have a couple of play labs around the country, and actually even in China, so that we have the opportunity to experience culturally. That's changed, right, where we open it up beyond just US. There are some things that are universal, but there are some nuances that you want to strike from a toy perspective in certain markets that actually make it more relevant and more engaging. But I think it's a constantly evolving process on how to get the consumer to reveal, and more than ever, we're looking, through to the future than trying to inform from the past. And how do you get that insight of what's next and what's going to resonate? And that's really the driving force right now.
I think the the access to data has so proliferated now
Yeah.
that we have the ability to crowdsource a lot of information through user-generated content, for example. So we're seeing how consumers are interacting with our properties just through the way that they express themselves in short-form video.
Yeah.
But I'd also say to your question, Marty, that the types of questions that you ask now have changed dramatically. And again, I sound like a stuck record going back to it's not just about the toy, but the types of questions that you ask a consumer about how they experience something and how they engage with something, that's probably the biggest shift of certainly our organization. We don't just ask questions about toys anymore. It's about the
Yeah.
whole experience.
It's not just about feature anymore.
What was that?
It's not just about feature anymore.
Right, right,
Because you want to capture the whole experience.
right. So what are the questions, I don't want to dive, however specifically you want to dive
proprietary
into it, what are the
information, Mark.
questions that you're asking in those kinds of sessions that are?
Well, we do sometimes. We'll go in home. We don't bring them to us. We go and observe them in their own home and engaging with their children and what they play with and how they play and what's going on in terms of how they schedule their time, those kinds of things. So that's being used more frequently. Everything is getting more granular. The world is getting smaller, I think, in a lot of ways, because there's so much more personalization and customization as a meaningful point of differentiation. So you have to go with that.
Simon, you brought up user-generated content. Where does user-generated content enter into the brand building and marketing equation at this point?
Well, I think it's an incredibly important part of the dialogue that you have with consumers because we've all seen that it authenticates what you do. And I think a lot of brands struggled in the past with how do you allow a consumer to play with your brands, and you may lose a little bit of your voice. What will they do with it? How will they tell your story? The music industry went through this with the whole digitization of music and Rhapsody and the whole piece. But I think everyone recognized that actually the world wasn't as scary, that fans had the interest of the franchise at heart, and actually if you allow them to play and you allow them to be creative, you can get incredible source material, you can get incredible experiences from them, and at the end of the day, they're just enjoying your products. So we've embraced it.
Yeah.
We've developed a brand based on user-generated content, which is very interesting in and of itself, from the digital space to Heroes, where individually these guys have these followings of billions and billions of views and became celebrities in their own rights by creating user-generated content based on other people's brands for the most part. But they are their own brand, and that's been really interesting, and the power that they have to reach their audience in a very significant way and drive retail purchases is unheard of, I think, in our industry in terms of how that's changed in the past few years.
I think you end up being a curator of sorts, to really, you can't buy an authentic review of your product, right? So that's an amazing thing that can happen if you think about that Chewbacca mask. I mean, that's an incredible endorsement, right? But then what you do with it and how you curate that to elevate it to the next level, I think Hasbro and Disney did a brilliant job, giving that woman her celebrity and all the rest of it. But it happens in a groundswell that you can't control, which is the magic of it. And then it's what you do with it, that piece that you can control. And so you end up being a curator of sorts.
How many people out there have seen the video with the Chewbacca mask?
Come on.
What were the rest of you doing?
But I think it's good because you talk about authenticity, right? You couldn't plan that.
No.
That was an authentic moment,
Yeah.
and authenticity is always so key right now. And that's also key in the content piece of it because they want to feel it's real and they want to feel they can identify with it. And that clip was exactly that. It was a moment of time that could have been anybody, and it's hard to recreate that.
Yeah.
You'd asked a question, Marty, about insights, which I think is related, and the changes that are happening in how we research, but it's also the output of that is how we respond. And
Yeah.
I would say that the speed at which consumers are now responding to input, this industry and everyone in this room, not just the toy industry, but the whole consumer products industry, is going to have to speed up its ability to reach that consumer faster, quicker with product and opportunities. Because we work on cycles, we work on seasons, but consumers don't. And the overnight sensation that can happen, that can have a product impact, is just going to become increasingly ubiquitous.
Yeah, well, I remember a year ago on this stage, we were doing a discussion of retail, and Henry Stupp of Cherokee told the story of a skirt that they had been supplying to Target all of a sudden took off. They couldn't keep it in stock. Target hadn't promoted it. Cherokee hadn't done an ad campaign, hadn't done anything with it. And nobody could figure out why. And it turns out that there was a blogger who said, "Look at this cute skirt I just got at Target." And boom. So, as he was saying, you as brand owners or as manufacturers are not really in such control of your own destiny as you may have been in the past. And that can be both wonderful, but at the same time disconcerting. How do you adjust to being in that environment? You talk about you have to be faster to react, but I also suppose that you have to think harder about how you react, because you can lose that moment of authenticity if the consumer feels that, okay, Hasbro, Mattel, Jazzwares, whoever is just now going to take advantage of this, with filthy commerce and all that. We're being manipulated. How do you balance those two things of wanting to take advantage of a wonderfully viral moment, but yet not overdoing it and having the consumer feel like they're being manipulated?
Well, I think sometimes satisfying demand is obviously a good thing, but sometimes actually creating that demand and not being able to satisfy it can help you as well, because it can create a different kind of dialogue with the consumer. Now, you don't want them to walk away empty-handed, but I think creating a real sort of social movement that you can capture and you can express it either through content, through stories. It doesn't necessarily have to be immediately through product. So, when we're launching new franchises, as we're going to do, we're planning in advance that this will happen. We want to lead them down a path, but I think we all recognize that that may happen a lot faster than we anticipated.
I'll say for the Trekkies out there, resistance is futile, right? So you may as well embrace it and celebrate it and engage, because it's going to be there whether you planned it or not. So the more you resist it, that's when you get into those negative cycles of consumers believing that you've got this mean commercial viewpoint that you're trying to get across. So I think you have to embrace it and celebrate it.
And it's
much as you
become
can.
the authenticity issue is an issue, but even with the unboxers and influencers that we all work with, they've changed a lot. They've become more commercialized. They didn't used to send them a box and they'd open it. There was never a charge. Now that's not necessarily the case. Although when they are doing it and they're not charging you, you feel much better about your brand because they want to make sure they're getting the views. But why do some episodes views get 100 views and some get 1 million?
Yeah.
And it's the secret sauce that I guess we're trying to figure out.
I mean, I recall, I guess it was late 2014 when Disney launched Frozen, and which took everybody by surprise, including Disney itself. And I was getting calls from the general media asking me very cynically, well, isn't Disney just managing these shortages, and trying to hype it up and all that? And I'm saying, no. They would be loving to sell you lots of stuff. But it was one of these, it's kind of, I guess, viral. It was a viral surprise, what Frozen became. And I guess everybody, the licensees and everybody, spent the next year catching up. So it's become just almost a chaotic environment in many respects. I think it's a wonderfully chaotic environment. But then again, I'm not trying to ship product to suppliers. I'm not trying to have things in stock and manage my inventory. Is it still possible, or is it possible, to launch a toy line at this point without a backstory or content supporting it?
We talked about this earlier, and it's hard, but if we think Moose did it, and unbelievably well. But content ultimately played a big factor in that. And it's really interesting because I don't think they could have even anticipated how significant the content piece would have been when they had launched the brand, but they worked hand in hand. And I think that 360 marketing we see now is so critical with any brand. And the storytelling, like I said earlier, it doesn't have to be so long, but there has to probably be some sort of story.
I think you can. I remain quite hopeful on it. It is harder, for sure, because there's a lot of noise out there with a lot of content. But I think when you inspire the imagination, I think about Singamajigs, or I think about Rainbow Loom, like that. It captured. I mean, that had a content play, arguably, with the YouTube component. But you capture people's imaginations in a way with a toy that. Again, it's what's so beautiful about the category, that it can break out without content first. I think there's a content component that follows quickly now, which is different than it was in the past. So that's one way I think also the industry has changed. But I think it is possible, and we certainly, we have part of my division's responsibility, I think, is to do that as well, to keep the toy industry buoyant by not just everything being reliant on content. It needs to be a balance.
Yeah, I think to Susie and Laura's point, it depends on the type of content. Not everything has to have a television series or a feature film. It certainly helps in terms of the size and scale, but I'll give you an example of Spirograph that we launched a couple of years ago, which came out of our vault. And that's very much based on an arts and crafts play pattern, which is such a terrific experience. It's very physical, it's very analog and old school, and done incredibly well. Now, obviously, there's content behind it in terms of marketing and retail support, but in terms of traditional content, it isn't really there. So there's absolutely a place for it.
What was let's look at something like Spirograph. Was there a decision made, this is a really good thing we have in our vault, let's figure out how do we relaunch it or work on it, and then what content can we put behind it, or, what was the process there?
Yeah, we have many brands at Hasbro. We have what we call a vault. We looked at our vault and looked at brands that perhaps we haven't activated in the past. We lined them all up and made the decision on which ones we felt could be reinvented, reimagined, reignited. Spirograph quickly rose to the top of that because we knew from our insights on girls' play patterns, particularly, and for boys as well, on the arts and crafts movement. And we dusted it off. We worked with a brilliant partner on the back of it who really took it, helped own it, develop and build it, and we really gave them literally the license to reinvent. Obviously with our guidance, and it was very much a two-way street, and that's how it came to market, and it's done incredibly well.
Susie, as a toy manufacturer, and you're here kind of as licensee in most respects, what are the criteria? How do you decide if the content is toyetic enough to support? How do you look at that decision?
We look at a lot of content, for sure. We're looking at the best content has a play pattern organically embedded. And so, whether it's vehicle play or doll play, nurturing play, for us, looking at how we can bring to life through a play pattern that will resonate is the key criteria. We're also looking at our portfolio and saying, okay, well, we're covered for girls 2 to 4. We want, so just kind of how do you balance the mix in terms of what you're doing so you're not overlapping too much in a particular segment, and you have some balance there. But mostly when we look at content, it's to see if you can imagine the toy line organically without having to stretch too far and say, oh, I wish you had done this, or I wish you had done that. But more than ever, we're working with partners earlier. And we love to do that because the story is the key. we don't want to make a big long toy commercial. That's not what we're trying to do. We want a great, compelling story. You know, story is king. And so we're working earlier than ever with the writers and the partners that we're working with to really craft the story together and give them the toyetic lens, even if they don't use it. It's fine. Don't use it if it doesn't make sense and it's not organic to the story, because the authenticity piece, you're going to feel it if it's forced in. But we find partners are willing to open up earlier and show us ideas sooner so that we can impact the toy direction.
Can you give me an idea when you say earlier? What's a typical
So-
time? Is there a typical timeline? Not that there's ever anything typical, but
Yeah, I think, well, you know, a toy line used to take, you know, a year and a half to develop, as did content. And we used to see things when they were in, you know, kind of their ready to show a sizzle at licensing show form. Now we tend to see them in, you know, line art or black and white animatics. We tend to see it, and the window for everything is shortening, right? I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with Simon on every aspect, not only as it relates to the speed that you respond to YouTube people with, you know, with commentary, but also the speed that you have to develop a line. Hitting the trend now is more important than ever. So, you know, that year and a half cycle has come down. So now we'll see things maybe a year and a half out, but we have to bring the product to market sooner. So the window's always changing. It's really when it's the seed of the idea. Sometimes we just see the treatment. We just see like a positioning of this is what we're thinking. Do you think there's a premise here? And it could even just be a book that they put together with some images. It can be as rudimentary as that, or it can be as sophisticated as some full-blown animation. But we can tell if there's something there to mine earlier, and then we also can help to inform it. So that there's a commercial opportunity, not just for toy, but across licensing.
yeah. I mean, Laura,
Yeah. I'd say at Jazzwares it's a little bit different because we don't always see everything as early as Mattel and Hasbro. So we're always out there kind of looking for the diamond in the rough. What's the opportunity? Why is it an opportunity for us? And we look at the toyetic approach, but sometimes it's not right for a toy yet. Maybe that brand needs to live within our licensing division and have an apparel licensee on it first. Let's see if it resonates. Maybe we think it has some of the components, but not ready for toys yet. You know, toys is difficult. We tool. It takes time, and we are fast. We are traditionally 9 months from concept to market, sometimes 6, and but that's still a long window in our business, and trends come and go. So we look at it definitely in multiple different ways, and we look at a property and say, okay, really, who's the demographic? Is it a demographic that appeals to Jazzwares as a customer? Is it a demographic we can grow? Can it expand? And then we try to figure out the product scenario after that.
has speed to market I've heard that referenced
Yeah.
a few times. Has speed to market become a more pressing issue in the toy industry than it ever was? You know, on the apparel side, it's relatively easier, where you're not tooling up and things of that sort. But how has this whole content move and just the general consumer landscape impacted the issue of speed to market?
I mean, our success at Jazzwares really has been based on speed to market, that we were able to come in on brands and move very quickly and identify a trend and find the opportunity to get it out in market. And maybe not always in mass retail. Sometimes it's mid-tier, sometimes it's specialty, it's whatever fits. But that's really what we've always done as a company. And even as we've grown so significantly, we still look to do that. We're nimble, we're fast, and we're looking for that opportunity, but it has to make sense. Can it stand alone by itself? And those are some of the challenges of just reacting and sitting back and having the time to really think it through in a meaningful way.
I think as a global organization, speed to market has definitely dramatically impacted how you can go to different countries and territories either at the same time or within at least an acceptable framework. I think the biggest shift that I think the industry has done a good job of here, and we have to continue to improve upon, is we're bringing people into that conversation a lot earlier in terms of the product development process. So I think we've done a great job of educating retail and showing retail sort of the early stages, I think to Susie's point, whether it be the animatics, line drawings, and actually involving them in that dialogue. It may not make the process faster, but I think it does actually speed up a lot of the decision making so that we can actually move it quicker, so to speak. And I think that's a big shift that everyone in this room has to really take on board. How do you bring people in earlier? And that's not just retail, but it's everything from user-generated content, tastemakers, designers, writers, artists, whoever that might be.
And I think retailers are moving faster. Sorry, Susie.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think retailers are reacting a lot better than before. They're willing to look at a property that maybe they didn't know of 2 months ago or 3 months ago and really give it consideration for the next set.
Yeah.
And that did not used to be the case, at least in our experience a few years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, speed to market is definitely a cornerstone now. The part of the reason we established a division that has license partnerships and can capture trends, we're like the toy company within the toy company. That's the entrepreneurial arm that has to get to market quickly. So we totally recognize that. We can't be stuck. Mattel has amazing processes that get us great innovation, but you have to also be able to innovate on a dime and turn things around. And we're definitely all about that right now.
Now, does that also include the in-house content creators? Do they have to then generate more content? Does it become this, snowball rolling downhill, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think
it all begets, when it works.
Just with everything, it's a balance, right? You don't do everything on an accelerated schedule. You do the things that are going to be important and break through on an accelerated schedule. So, recently we're launching this fall the Alvin and the Chipmunks line. We turned that around in 6 months. Because there's an opportunity now. The ratings are good. The show is on air, so you want to be responsive at the time when the brand is the most meaningful. And you miss that window quickly because of so much content and the stream, and so many things are changing so fast, right? And so it kind of goes to your earlier questions. So speed to market is an imperative because consumers move on more quickly from content piece to content piece.
Right.
I think to your point, Marty, where brands have to sort of balance, and I believe, sort of selfishly speaking, Hasbro's done a nice job of sort of balancing the volume and the quality. On the one hand, you do want volume in terms of your content and across platforms. You want to be able to tell your story. But it's easy to fall down on the other side of the equation, which is you just put out stuff that doesn't resonate. And that's where smart brand franchise planning comes in. That you can create a quality story still, whether it be short form, long form, but at the same time you have enough of it to engage. And I think that's to Susie's point, you've got to play that balance very, very well, because it's easy to flip down on the side of, I've just seen so much of this stuff.
Not just getting it out there to get it out there. You do want it to resonate.
Right.
So.
And I think the role of in-house content creators, we have our own team at Jazzwares, it's critical. It is critical because they're responding to the needs of the community on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. That community requires more and more information and content, and we find that it allows the brand to grow much more quickly, but that we need to really be ready day and date with that strategy in place and active even before, start seeding the market earlier. So that role where I would say, there was for us, there was no in-house content team 3 years ago. And now that team, is grown, the fastest growing team at Jazzwares, because we need to respond to the fans and provide different ways for them to see what's going on.
Does that go down to like a Snapchat clip?
It goes down to everything. Maybe not as much Snapchat because we tend to have a lot of boys' properties and preschool properties, but it goes down to the Facebook postings. It goes to Instagram, but it's helping create stop motion animation, creating stop motion animation, providing our influencers with content for them to readily use on their site because they may not have the time to create a few-minute clip. So providing assets to them that they can adjust and use in the way that makes sense for them.
Right. I'm sure there are 3-year-olds with Snapchat accounts. But, yeah.
I'm scared.
Simon, you mentioned the global marketplace, and I'm wondering how you adapt. Content can often be very localized. How you adapt the content creation process, how you adapt your marketing process for a toy, to take into account that we're not just talking about a very US-centric or even Western-centric marketplace anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've done a terrific job of really globalizing our operation and localizing it at the same time. If I think about our publishing business, for example, we've moved from a relatively North America-centric English language business from a good few years ago to being very much a localized creator of content. So although we have global and pan-regional partnerships, we make sure implicitly that our stories are told in local language with local customs. And we're doing that really across all of our content creation. Now, the flip side and the beauty is that great stories resonate anywhere. And we've seen that in the globalization of the box office, for example. With China and the evolution of China and the size of that box office, we know that stories resonate. Tell a good story, you get a good response from consumers. But I do think it's critical, and I think for this industry, that we localize a lot of what we do. I think it helps your engagement with the consumer. And it doesn't have to happen just through content. It's how you talk to them through your marketing voice, through your advertising voice. But the idea of the big international American company coming in is changed dramatically.
Yeah. We're doing more than ever. We're working with partners in various countries around the world on IP that originates outside of the US, and creating toy lines for that IP, and then hoping that it goes global. But if it doesn't, we know it will resonate where it's incepted. And so that's also another factor. The U.S. isn't the only market in the world that's creating content. So,
Yeah. And that's at Jazzwares, we're Simon and Susie, we're basically the same approach, where we always say we're global with a local approach. And it could be on the brand selection, which we know will never leave a certain market. We signed a brand in Germany that will never go probably anywhere else besides Germany, but it's important for our company in that market. In the UK, we do this and hope it will go broader, but sometimes we know it won't. And we're always looking at that. But again, when we look at properties on the outside, we want to look at properties that are localized already. Or is there a plan? Is there a globalization strategy? Can we help implement a globalization strategy? Because I know that my international team every day, they're like, is it localized? Is it available for us? How does it work in our market? And how does it translate? Because the translation piece is very complicated, because it doesn't always localize the right way, especially in markets like Germany and Russia. And so we always want to be aware of that and making sure we're doing the best for each individual market.
Do you have content people in all those other markets who, if you're going to create local content, can do it kind of on the ground there? Or I don't know what the
For
structure
Jazzwares,
is,
that's an expanding. We have marketing teams in each market now. We've expanded on the localization. We have it handled within the markets because they're going to do it the best. And so we empower them to do that. Just like product development on a brand that's coming out of Germany is probably going to be much better handled out of Germany, because the taste is a little bit different, the sensibility, the culture. So we're able to adapt to that as a company.
Right. There was reference made, and I don't remember who made it, earlier in the conversation, to content being shared with licensees. Or as a licensee getting content from the IP owners. Has that changed in terms of how much is shared with the licensees and when and how they can use it, whether online or in any other way?
I think what we've certainly found is the earlier we give people a peek behind the curtain and involved in the process with the right talent and the right creatives, and this room is a great example of extremely talented consumer products experts that we want to utilize on our consumer product side. What's interesting, we don't really refer to licensing as our team anymore. We don't have a licensing team. Licensing is the business model as much as manufacturing is a business model. We refer to it as consumer products. And I think the mindset of thinking about CP as a brand building business means that you have to bring people in early, because you can't just give someone a style guide and say, now go make something. That world died a long time ago. You have to bring people into that dialogue. And that's not just the product development dialogue, that's the marketing dialogue, that's the content dialogue. And it's great to get input from experts to help you with that.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that for us in developing the content piece, we're looking. I lost my train of thought. I forgot. Never mind.
Susie, you were going to say something.
Sorry.
I'm like, what was the question again? Remind us the question. I went on another train of thought that wasn't related. So.
It's early in the morning in Vegas, people. In terms of content being shared with licensees.
That was the question.
Yes.
All right, reset, Laura.
Yeah.
So, I remember a couple of years ago, we had seen a video out there that was created by a user out there, and that had taken some of our one of the brands and had put together a stop motion animation. And the video had like 3 million views within a couple of weeks. So our reaction was to go back to the licensor and say, we'd like to get some more content like that on YouTube. And they were like, no. Definitely not, because that, again, like Simon had said, it was risky because, what were they going to do with it? Was there going to be violence? Was there going to be death? We didn't know what would happen. But now those conversations with licensors are completely different. They're definitely open to it. It's an ongoing conversation. I know it's a conversation we have with Hasbro. And we are able to say, it's supportive in marketing. It's supportive to help build your brand in a really positive way. Of course, we're going to monitor it, but it feels right, it feels authentic, people are already responding to it, and licensors have totally shifted. So there was a good answer there.
Every so often, it's good to hit reset. Susie, you.
Yeah, along the same lines, that we want to be the best possible partner we can be, and we can be a better partner if the doors are open earlier. So, I think that there's a general big studios or smaller players where they're embracing opening up earlier so that we can maximize the opportunity together.
Great. Well, on that note about maximizing opportunities, there is a show about to open. There are seminars to be gone to. This is a week about finding the opportunities to maximize. I would like to thank our 3 panelists.
Thank you, Martin.
Susie,
Thank you,
Simon,
Martin.
Laura.
Thanks,
And I wish you all a cool 3 days inside in Vegas. There's a great reason to stay at the show longer than you might have otherwise. But have a great weekend. Thank you much for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.